Welcome to our bite-sized episodes of the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast, brought to you direct from the CRiC Conference 2024. Enjoy this episode. Okay, we're back again for another bite-sized episode of the Cardiff Met Sports Coaching Hub podcast, live from the CRiC Conference 2024, joined by Dr Tom Leeder. Tom, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, happy to have you on. You've just delivered your first presentation of the weekend. You're doing two at CRiC.
I know.
And we are going to spend the next 10 to 15 minutes talking about that first presentation that you've just done. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of that. If anyone listening wants to know a little bit more about your second presentation, I'm sure that's going to be available on the CRiC website later on down the line. So just for context, this is number one of your two presentations. Yeah. So, but let's start with a little bit about yourself. So current role, background, history in coaching, and what sort of led you to where you are now.
Yep, excellent. So I'm a lecturer in PE and sport pedagogy at the University of East Anglia in Norwich. I've been there since 2022, so two years now. Norwich is my home. It's where I did my undergraduate degree in PE. I went to Loughborough University, did my master's there. Great to be taught by Professor Chris Cushion, really sort of encouraged me and gave me my enthusiasm to understand coaching more critically. After that, went back to UEA to do my PhD, which was looking at the learning and development of sport coach mentors. So I passed my Viva in 2020, spent a couple of years at University of Essex as a lecturer in sports coaching, and then, as I say, moved back to UEA in 2022. But in terms of a sporting background, football was my kind of main sport, not so much as a player. Got into coaching probably when I was about 17, 18. Spent a couple of years working at Norwich City and Leicester City in various roles. Worked for the FA for a couple of years as well as a coach developer, but my practitioner days are not over for good, they're just on hold for now. Okay. So yeah, at the minute I'm enjoying my weekends and evenings, but I'm sure the bug to coach will come back again very soon.
It always does, absolutely. So like we say, you just delivered at the CRiC Conference. Yes. So tell us a little bit about that presentation. What was sort of the key theme of it, and we'll get into some of the findings then of your work.
Yeah, so my first presentation was looking at a research project I conducted last year in collaboration with British Orienteering. So British Orienteering were very interested in critically reviewing their current coach education system, primarily because they had some negative feedback, I suppose, from coaches and wanted to kind of understand how can we make this better, more meaningful, more impactful. So worked on the research project with British Orienteering, looking at coach education system. And one of the issues that came up was this idea of fast tracking. So this idea that if you have a background as an athlete, especially as an elite athlete, so being an elite orienteer, that allows you to bypass some of the coach education courses on the pathway. So you don't need to do a level 1 course. You can jump in at level 2 or higher and go from there. So the presentation just now was just looking at some of the data from that project. So I spoke to both coaches and coach developers within British Orienteering system just to get their viewpoints and perspectives on it, really. So yeah, sharing some of those findings from that project there.
So how did that project start? Did you approach British Orienteering? Did they approach you? How did you create that relationship, and where did that stem from?
Yeah, really good question. I think it's something that Robin spoke about as well, where he sort of mentioned a lot yesterday, where he sort of mentioned that only once in his career has an organisation approached him. So in this instance, I spent a lot of time sending a lot of emails to various national governing bodies. So I really saw the value in, as an academic, wanting to work with national governing bodies and conducting collaborative research projects. So it was very much a lot of cold calling. I sent a lot of emails out to, I'd go on NGB website, who's the coach education, coach learning, coach education is my sort of main area of interest. I'd look for who's the coach education manager or similar role. Send a lot of emails out, and British Orienteering got back to me and said, we like the sound of this. We actually have an idea. Let's get together and chat. And these conversations first started in sort of 2022, and then start of last year, early 2023 was when the project really kicked off. So a lot of cold calling, but hopefully now that first project is done, there's hopefully the potential to either work with British Orienteering on future projects, or can go to NGBs and say, hey, look, I've done this, would you like to do something similar?
Perfect. Speaks a lot to that idea of kind of invisible work, all that stuff that goes on behind the scenes. 100%. We see the output and we see the presentations, but not so much all the graph that goes in before. So you get into British Orienteering, they give you a bit of a brief or an idea of some of the feedback that they've had, and you start interviewing some of the coaches and some of the coach developers. What comes out of those interviews?
Yeah, so in chatting to the coaches and the coach developers, whilst they spoke about the coach education system in terms of how it could be improved, obviously the focus of the presentation was on that area or issue of fast tracking. And what we kind of found in the research was that coaches didn't see formal coach education as being something that would really enhance their practice, and they saw coach education as a hurdle, a barrier to their progression, and something they wanted to get through as quickly as possible, and were very much in favour of this idea of fast tracking. So this idea that, okay, yes, if you are elite orienteer, you have that elite athletic experience, that experience is valorised, it's more important, it's more useful for you as a coach than any knowledge or any content within a formal coach education course. So they spoke about how in their own practice, they relied on this experience as an orienteer and didn't see coach education as being something important. In contrast to that, coach developers, so the individuals who obviously have designed the courses and deliver, they obviously felt opposite and actually said, coach education is really valuable and we shouldn't be fast tracking. However, the issue that we have is that the people above, both the coaches and the coach developers, the policymakers within the organisation, legitimised this practice of fast tracking, and it was written in documentation and it was a accepted practice. So it was interesting. We had this kind of these contrasting views that actually the coach developers were against it, the coaches were for it, but the system allowed it to happen, and hence it did happen uncritically. And they never really had the opportunity, I think, as an organisation to actually sit down and think, what is the value of fast tracking here? Yes, it means that we get more, potentially more qualified coaches, but what about the coaches' learning and development? Are they, reproducing practices uncritically as they were, coaching as they were coached as an orienteer, for example? So I think the research was a good opportunity for them to take stock, and for actually coaches and coach developers to take stock as well, and just sort of have a look at what they're currently doing and why really. So why is fast tracking in place?
Okay, so let's see if I can get this question right. So you've got slightly sort of contradicting opinions from the coach developers and the coaches. Mm-hmm. One saying actually it's really valuable. One saying it's probably not. It's a bit more of a hurdle. How do you position or sort of distance yourself from those when you're making your own interpretation of that to then make recommendations about what should happen?
Yeah, it's a really difficult question because obviously I have my own opinion on the topic, and I think this issue of fast track and all this general assumption if you've played you can coach has been floating around the kind of sport coaching field for a good few years now, and we see it in many sports, especially I think Alex Blackett's work, for example, is really good at in football and rugby, looking at how this is an accepted practice. But in that moment, you're right, it's really difficult to try and separate my own perspectives on the topic when I'm talking to coaches. So we didn't have heated discussions, but when I was engaged in the focus groups with the coaches and the interviews, I was trying to challenge them a little bit, and I was trying to really understand why they felt that it was okay just to devalue coach education. It wasn't important. Why it was okay, or assumed, that because I can do this course really quickly, I can run around it and navigate this course, that means that I'll be able to effectively work with others and deliver sessions appropriately. So you're right, I had to be very reflexive as a researcher, and you can't separate or detach yourself from the research process, but I certainly think it's something that I needed to be cautious of, especially in the interviews. And I tried to, while it's not possible, I did try to remain neutral as best as I can. But it's a really interesting point.
Absolutely. So key findings then, key recommendations, what's sort of next? Because we've been talking over the weekend about, okay, so what? Where's the impact? What's happening as a result of this?
Yeah.
So how receptive have British Orienteering been? Have you managed to sort of facilitate any impact, any changes in what they're doing?
Yeah, I can't. First of all, I can't speak highly enough of British Orienteering as an organisation. We very much spoke about in the past maybe this theory-practice divide between practitioners, national governing bodies, and academics, but British Orienteering have been very supportive of the project in terms of wanting to. We spoke about being critical this weekend and what that means, but really wanting to understand what they have been doing, subconsciously, I suppose, and really understand what they've been doing and why. So from my perspective, working with this organisation has been a real pleasure and something I've really enjoyed. And I'm pleased to see that the recommendations made from the project as a whole looked at three main areas. So very quickly, the three main areas were looking at their level 1 and level 3 courses, so the kind of entry level and the end of the pathway, if we see coach education as that kind of linear trajectory. The issue of fast tracking, so why is it in place? What could be some of the potential challenges or issues with it? And then the other area, or the final area of review, looked at kind of what provision can we provide in between formal qualifications, so the CPD options, for example. So those were the three main recommendations, and I'm pleased to say that the organisation has been very receptive to it and are currently, as a result of the project, restructuring their coach education pathway. So their initial, of those three areas, the initial one they're focusing on first is the CPD option, and add in more sort of non-formal, informal learning opportunities for their coaches, as well as reconsidering this fast tracking element. Development in the level 1 and level 3, obviously we have to appreciate there's logistics, there's time, there's money. It's not quick. It's not so easy to say, okay, fine, let's redevelop a new course and everyone's enrolled on it and we just go from there. So that's how they currently see it, as kind of a 3-year project, 3 or 4 year project from now. So the project started in 2023. By the end of kind of 2026, start 2027, hopefully those 3 recommendations will have been implemented.
Amazing, perfect. And so just to wrap things up, what's next for you? What's next for your research? You've just sort of hinted at maybe wanting to come back to coaching at some point as well, but what have you got lined up?
So my research interests, I suppose, are quite broad. My background, as I say, mainly looking at critically analysing coach education, coach development, but I'm very interested in a range of different areas across coaching and using a range of different social theorists and learning theorists. So for me, I'm keen to continue working with national governing bodies. I think as academics, we want our work to have impact, we want it to have change, and this is probably one of the first real examples of some of my work which looks like it's having an impact, whatever that may be. So for me, I think continue to work with different national governing bodies, and I think British Orienteering won't mind me saying this, like orienteering is not a mainstream sport. It's not a football, rugby, cricket. It's not something that's delivered or as many people participate in. So I'm really passionate at the minute about working with perhaps underrepresented or non-mainstream sports. So I think trying to work with some of those national governing bodies moving forward will be something I'm keen and continue bridging that theory to practice divide. And let's see about getting back on the on the touchline and maybe doing some more coaching or coach developer work as well. I'm quite keen as well to maybe move out of my football bubble, and this research project was a good example of that, in talking to coaches from other sports, other backgrounds. I think I'd like to continue doing that, and definitely more in situ work, being there on the ground with the coaches, which is definitely something that we can always do more of in the sport coaching world. Spot on.
Something to look forward to. Right, we have officially bitten all of our bite-sized chunks, so really appreciate you dropping in to come and share some of that presentation with us, and I'm sure we'll have you back on for a full episode later on down the line.
Definitely. Thank you very much. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. If you want to know a little bit more about CRiC, head to the website cricsportcoaching.com, and you can follow along on Twitter as well at @cric_SCR.